Sandy Martin, welcome to the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm excited to discover more of your brilliance today and show it with the audience because you combine some of the greatest, most well researched things in both science and the spiritual world. And before we get into all of that, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you're showing up in the world today.
I think I'm showing up in faith. I'm spending a lot of time writing. I'm in a chrysalis, if you will. I'm in my cocoon phase. I am sharing my truth with people one to one, but I'm a little less public than I have been for a while. For the last 2 years, I've been pushing biohacking. Biohacker Expo was my event that I ran for 2 years in Miami. That was on the heels of running Comic Cons for 14 years.
Wow.
And so I'm accustomed to big events and big ideas and being in front of a crowd. And I've taken some lessons from the last 16 years and decided it's time to, it's time to get very real about my why.
So I would love to hear more about the journey that's led up to this and then getting into the why. A lot of people that tune into this and are guests on this are speakers. They love attending events, being a part of events. And this is a very interesting background in conversations. I know that you also are incredibly brilliant with AI and have some fun stories that you've infused into your event work. Can you tell us a little bit about this arc of working in Comic Cons, what you've learned, and then how you brought that into the Biohacking Summit and how that's shaped where we're going to speak about today?
Yeah. I got into Comic Cons because my ex-husband was into Comic Cons. And he started an event called Florida SuperCon in 2006. I started helping out in 2008. By 2014, I was working 2 full-time jobs. I had a thriving career in media, and I was also working as many hours in the evenings and weekends helping him. And I finally doubled down on the events, went double time helping him, and we eventually sold SuperCon to a large event company, which allowed us to expand in other markets under a different brand called GalaxyCon. And frankly, I had an MBA. I was driven. I knew how to structure a business. I was scared all the time. And my primary motivation in everything I did was to make sure we did not lose our ass. And so that was financial, it was security, it was relationships. I managed all the stakeholders, all the operations. There's a documentary about me running SuperCon called Surviving SuperCon, and surviving is the right word. I barely survived SuperCon. And then I got sick after we sold it and we had started GalaxyCon. COVID hit. We rebranded with virtuals. I quadrupled the size of the company within 6 months. We went from 4 large live events, 50,000 people in a weekend, to doing everything virtually and quadrupled the revenue. And that was shocking. Like we were really on a roll. And I was the most proud of that work at that time in my whole life. And then I was exposed to black mold. I didn't know it. And I went from like top of everything I'd ever done in life. My opinion of my capabilities, the highest, I think, even to this day, because I've been still on a road to recovery. And then within 2 weeks, I was struggling to put together sentences. And anything sequential was just rocked. And I couldn't run through sequences. I was going through what I called buffering, the pinwheel on an old Mac, just spin. Mm-hmm. I felt like that was happening inside my brain. And then I got progressively sick. So at first just made me feel like I couldn't think. And every time I tried to work, I just completely screwed it up. So I had to stop working for the safety of the company. And people who I thought were incompetent were running the company in my absence. And that was humbling. it got so bad. I mean, I really lost it was, there was no ego anymore. Like, it was so humbling and so devastating that I had to find a new way of looking at my life, because everything I knew to be me was gone. I believe that mold has an intelligence to it, and I believe that it gravitated to the area of my brain that was the most active. So literally everything that made me who I thought I was impaired, was quiet. And then what I recognized one day, this is about 4 months in, I recognized that all I had was presence. And I had been so stressed all those years trying to maintain the integrity of the company, all out of fear, that I'd been trying to find the now. I knew I needed stress relief. I started to do heart math meditations and all kinds of things to try to get myself into a space where I could calm down. And then here I was in presence, unable to get out of it. So I took a deep dive into presence, and I accepted where I was. I observed the world through presence. And because it was during the time of COVID, there weren't a lot of events going on, but I was aware of some sound healing events happening in town. And I had a massage where she tapped a sound bowl by my head, and it sent like tingles through my whole body. And so I wanted to do that. I thought, that's a good way to heal. I'll do that. But it took me about 6 months before I went. And by that point, I had discovered, through the influence of Dave Asprey and his books, which is how I discovered biohacking, I was able to determine what was wrong with me about 6 months after I got sick, and figured out it was mold. And then I was able to start detoxing. I'd done all kinds of things. I bought a hyperbaric hard shell 1.5 ATA hyperbaric oxygen chamber and light therapy and a bunch of things that I was using, and none of it worked. None of it made me feel better, get better. The chamber gave me headaches. That's common with mold, that you cannot biohack your way out of it. You have to get it out of your body. And so that's where I get this idea that biohacking starts with what you stop. And you can't, my cousin called me one day and said, Sandy, what do you think about lion's mane? I was like, why? He said, well, I have some brain fog. Do you think it'll help me? And I said, Brian, I think you should stop eating at McDonald's. And he did. 2 weeks later, he'd lost 14 pounds. He stopped soda. He stopped fast food. He stopped all kinds of things. And he had a very rapid transformation. Every now and again, you can get through to people. It's been hard watching people reject common sense information because it doesn't fit with their own personal narrative. Everything in moderation is a really common belief in our country. I don't believe in everything in moderation. I don't believe in McDonald's in moderation. I don't believe in a Coca-Cola in moderation. I just don't think it serves us. And so once I figured out how I could heal, I started to get better. I bought a gong after going to that sound therapy. I bought one from the woman who ran the studio. And I would just sit in front of it. I would take the mallet and just tap it, and I should tell you why. The first time I had been to my doctor's appointment, we can go into the history of doctor's appointments and how that was a disappointing nightmare. But once I found a functional medicine doctor who really understood mold, he did a tuning fork test on my toe, and I couldn't feel it because mold causes peripheral neuropathy. Capillary hypoperfusion. It's a mouthful. And then I went to a gong bath. And I couldn't feel anything. The second time I went to a gong bath the next week, I could feel, so the gong was behind me, behind my head, and my feet were in front of me and lying down on the floor. I could feel my toes. 2 weeks after, I couldn't because of the sound. Nothing else had really changed. And so I believed that the sound waves, as represented by these beautiful pictures on my wall, the sound waves shook the mold out of my brain and my body, and I was able to release it because the body is built to filter it out. Now, they say that 25 people cannot detox from mold. And 5% get sick who can. Typically 70% of people never know they're sick. They never know they have a problem. Their body's just constantly filtering. Now that causes stress on the kidneys and the liver, but most people are fine. So I was either part of the 5%, or there are 25% of people who are sick who, if they had better tools, they could get better. And I don't know the answer to that, but I know that the gongs helped me release it and heal. And I think what was that? We're 4 years out from that right now. And I bought my first gong just to sit in front of it and shake the mold out of my brain. And I would just sit for hours because I was stuck in presence. It didn't matter. Time was immaterial. And my husband's business was so successful that it was okay. I could just sit at home and tap my gong. And within a few months, I took a course on sound healing, and I decided to capture sounds of nature myself rather than buy some online because I wanted to play some tracks behind a gong ceremony. So I drove 9,000 miles around the country, and that was when I really started to shift. My first real stop was Sedona from Miami. Took a couple days, 3 days to get there with a few stops, and went to Sedona, the Grand Canyon, Santa Barbara. Oh my goodness. The Ritz-Carlton in Santa Barbara is lovely. I stayed there for 4 days. Because of the Comic-Con business, I did the whole thing on points. I drove my little Subaru around, and I met with my friends from HeartMath. I became friends with them over the years. I went to their headquarters. They've got some land in Boulder Creek, California. It's outside of Santa Cruz. And I stopped there for a couple of days, and then went up to Mount Shasta and Crater Lake and came down through Colorado. Stopped to see my family in Kentucky and then made it home. And it was 6 weeks and amazing, life-changing, and still timid about ceremony, but started to kind of break through my own insecurities little by little.
That's quite an amazing story, from being infusing peak business and events to high-end health and wellness, and even to things that are still yet to be understood, that might be categorized under spiritual in a sort of way. My first question is around, this is something that I've dealt with myself, as I've had a lot of mold toxicity in my own life, and I'm on my own recovery journey from many different things. And you mentioned 70% of people never know they have a problem. Do you think that it's 70% of people never have a problem, or does the way that mold works, which I've found to be somewhat mysterious and disconnected, that they can't actually connect the dots of what's happening, and maybe they feel okay? But in my experience, it's very rare that somebody, because these changes are very gradual over time, we don't really say like, oh, all of these different things that I'm experiencing, I have a problem. A lot of the times we write it off as, oh, maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe I, this or that. And while they may not say that they have a problem, the symptoms of the problem are so scattered and hard to connect that they just don't realize or understand what the problem is or how it's impacting.
Well, I think some of the symptoms of mold exposure are symptoms commonly associated with modern living, normal signs of aging, like everything's normalized so we can get a pill. I went to have this really high-end IV therapy done a couple weeks ago called EBO2. Sometimes people call it EBU. They take the blood out of one arm, and then they filter it, and then they run it through ozone and special light, and then they put it back in the other arm. And in the chair next to me was a priest, and he was talking to his nurse about his situation. And he said, I just was eavesdropping, and he said, I don't really know what's going on in my life, but I've gained 25 pounds this year, and I haven't changed anything at all in my life. And I said, pardon me, I don't mean to eavesdrop, but have you been exposed to mold? And he was like, yeah, I'm remediating right now. And I was like, that'll cause weight gain. So if someone experiences rapid weight gain, is the doctor saying, have you been exposed to mold? If someone is feeling aches in their knees, is the doctor asking if they've been exposed to mold? The symptoms can be in peripheral neuropathy. That's just normal. You're just getting older, headaches, sinus problems. Take an Allegra, take some Tylenol. They're so ready to treat our symptoms without asking any real questions about causing them. And then I don't know about you, but over the age of 35, people just start acting old.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the body filters it out better before perimenopause, before andropause, before, like, there's a tipping point where, oh, your metabolism's slowing down. Well, we know now that metabolic function is really a consequence of the inflammation in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so has it just been that people are wearing down because they're getting more and more inflamed? What is this slowing of metabolism? Is that normal? Is that like age related, or is that modern life related? Is it because of the toxins in our environment, the sugar we eat? What is it? And I don't think anybody has a clear answer, but I would say that if anybody's experiencing a sudden onset of symptoms, looking at toxic exposure of all kinds would be warranted.
I think that I agree with you on all of these things. And as somebody who has experienced mold, parasites, all kinds of health things, even somebody as well practiced as me, these things can influence your mindset and your perspective. And you can feel like the world is falling apart around you. And even if you are so blessed to be like, wow, this is probably mold exposure, to intellectually have that thought cross your head and to actually be able to believe it and give yourself the grace that's necessary is very difficult. And there are some macro symptoms that I see being expressed not on an individual level, but I feel that a lot of the problems and challenges that we are facing as a country and even as a global society can be linked to this. I think that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety. I think that there's a spirit of divisiveness, that we feel these problems inside of us. And not only because of the health issues, but because of the way the media and a lot of things, we project this biological anxiety that we're experiencing on those that we disagree with, the other
Absolutely.
political parties, the, whoever we see as our enemy or as the problem receives that. And I think that, yeah, the angst that we feel as a people, we're largely looking in the wrong direction for both the problem and the solution.
Well, one of the first podcasts I watched when I knew something was wrong with my brain was an interview that Tom Bilyeu did with Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she wrote the book, I think, How Emotions Are Made. He asked her what she would do if her daughter said she was depressed. Turns out her daughter did have problems with depression. And she said, well, I would have her mitochondria checked. And I didn't even know what mitochondria was. Like, I'd heard the word, but I didn't understand what it did in the body. And essentially she was saying that the body needs energy to handle trauma, stress, food intake, toxin exposure. And if your body budget is running low, then you're going to project onto the world a negative bias. I personally believe, it sounds like you do too, that the microbes in my gut, and if I have parasites, and if there's mold in my body, that I'm host to intelligent substances that are driving my cravings, driving my behavior. The alcoholics have a disbalance in their microbiome. There's a particular bacterial strain that is really common in alcoholics. Well, it's driving cravings. And I knew immediately that I was experiencing depression as a symptom, because my life was hard. It was hard, but I loved my life. And so I knew it wasn't me. It's such a weird thing. It sounds psychotic. Like, I have all of these depressed thoughts, but they're not mine.
Fortunate for me, because again, I have a very difficult time distinguishing myself from those kind of thoughts when I am experiencing those symptoms. But so we've gone a long way. We've covered a lot already, and you're working on 2 books, which
Would you like to hear? I realized I didn't wrap up the story into how I
yeah,
got into Biohacker Expo.
yeah,
So I was getting divorced, and we were sitting with the lawyer, me and my ex, and he happened to ask him how I was different before the mold and after the mold. And he said, oh, before she was a real boss bitch, and now she sits in a corner and plays gongs. And I had already decided to run an event, a metaphysical event, based on gongs and crystals and all kinds of woo-woo stuff because I felt comfortable in that world. And he said that, and it really bruised my ego. And I called him that night, and I said, that's not who I am. And he said, well, why do you like the gongs so much? And I said, well, it's biohacking. So then do an event about biohacking. I was like, what? Does that exist? And so I did some research, and within 2 weeks I rebranded, and that's how I launched Biohacker Expo, was that little ego bruise that I got in that one meeting.
oftentimes in the experience of mine of hearing probably thousands of stories now, these wounding, difficult moments plant the seeds for some of the greatest gifts in our lives. And that sounds like that. And now, great end cap and great transition into this. And it leaves an interesting question of what biohacking really is. And I know that one of your books that you've been working on is Biohacking Starts with No. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then you have another one coming out that I think is a very interesting bridge with everything that you've been talking about in terms of health, intention, mindset, and even spirituality. And I'd love to hear a bit about that one.
So shall I start with the grounded ritual spirit side or the biohacking side?
Briefly touch on Biohacking Starts with No, and then I really want to go deeper into the grounded ritual.
So as I touched on before, I wasn't able to get better through biohacking devices and supplements that I was taking until I could detox. And it's probably through the spiritual growth that I came to understand the power of the body to heal itself. You know, if you get a paper cut or if you cut a gash in your finger, you can kind of tape it up and the body will just heal it, right? Like that skin will come together, it will heal. You will not die from a gash on your finger. And our body does that everywhere. And it'll start with a little healthy inflammation, and slowly it will repair. We're making stem cells all the time in our bone marrow. What keeps that from getting where it needs to go? I have 2 friends in regenerative medicine, one who uses placental stem cells and the other who uses bone marrow stem cells to heal people. And one is like, well, if you could just heal anything with the stem cells from your bone marrow, wouldn't the body just heal itself? And I was like, well, maybe it's the weight gain, maybe it's the toxins and the fat, maybe it's, there are all kinds of reasons why our body might not be able to direct what needs to go where. Sometimes people have so much stress that their cortisol levels are super low. We usually associate stress with high cortisol, but if you have chronic high stress, then the body's like, no way, forget it. You just have chronically low cortisol and you feel this lack of energy you can't get through. And so the hormonal and the immune and the neural systems of the body, the nervous system, they all come together when we can strip away the nonsense, the insults to our bodies. That could be in our air, our water. We could filter. I run 3 Jaspers in my home. 1 would cover it, but I run 3 because I can't risk there being anything in my air. I filter it so that my lungs don't have to. I have a water filter on my tap. I filter my water so that my body doesn't have to. Do things that I make my own sound beds, and they provide lymphatic drainage when I run 33 or 36 hertz through the sound bed, and I just lie there. It just gently vibrates, and then I can feel I don't know if you've ever had a manual lymphatic drainage massage, but when your lymphatic system drains, your belly goes, You can just feel it. It's not your stomach growling. It's this like bubbly thing that happens in the area of your gut. I wish I knew exactly where it was. I don't. But we've got to get to total body coherence, and that includes emotions, thoughts, and respecting the needs of our physical body. And so I probably got there from the spirit side. And then once I started to realize, as I could let go, pardon me, UPS just arrived. Come here. It's okay, honey. Good boy. Once I started taking fewer supplements, using fewer devices, I was getting healthier because my orientation towards myself was improving. My overall homeostasis was better. And so I didn't need the external influences so much anymore. And witnessing that in myself and then talking to other people who had had similar experiences led me to believe that really it starts with what we stop. We've got to clear out these problems in our lives, and that we can arrive at a better foundation. I'm not saying biohacking doesn't work, because oxygen therapy will repair the brain. PEMF will take the inflammation out of a sore knee. There's light therapy. Gosh, I had a backache the other day. I put some light therapy on it and it felt better. But those things don't have the same power if we aren't centered, if we aren't coherent within ourselves.
Which I think is a great jumping point into grounded ritual. Can you tell us a bit about like the core theme and your goals with creating this book, which it seems like we've been kind of moving around throughout this whole conversation around what the missing piece really is. And it sounds like you might be touching on it in this book.
And I appreciate how you are helping me connect these dots, because every time I talk about this, I get so motivated and then I kind of lose sight of it and it gets challenging. But I see it as accessing the point of ourselves that exists as pure potential, quantum, if you will. Quantum reality is all possibilities at one point. It's not binary. It's not this or that. So I see it as an overlap, if you will, like a Venn diagram. I see it as an overlap between action and presence. And so it's only possible to have transformation where those points can converge. And they don't always overlap, right? Like, it's hard to be present while I'm doing something. And so I've created a couple of symbolic gestures that kind of trick the brain into being in that state. And so, for example, I just grabbed these two random crystals. I usually use a black tourmaline or a black obsidian in my right hand and a rose quartz or an amethyst in my left. I'm holding amethyst in my right now. There are people who believe that the sides of our body, based on the electromagnetic field and how it runs through our body, perceive the right side of the body as giving, letting go, and the left side is receiving, bringing in. And so I have a practice that I perform every full moon that is a release and renewal practice. I let go of something and I bring something in. And I do that on the full moon because there are a whole host of people that believe the full moon is a great time of letting go. And I believe that you have to let something go in order for something to come in. And so the last time I performed this ritual was on May 12th. Standing at the Potomac, where I happened to be for the week. And when I perform the ritual, I hold the stone and I imagine that thing that I'm ready to let go of flowing into the stone. And I feel the stone, it's present for me, and I really think about what I want to let go of. Sometimes I have tossed it in a creek, buried it in the ground. I put one into a little nook in the roots of a tree, but most of the time I like to throw it. And the physical act of throwing something that is holding what I'm ready to let go of, the physical act of throwing it and watching it soar, watching it hit the water of the river below me. I was standing on a bridge. That unites action and presence. I'm present in this moment, letting go, and I'm using my body as action. And the brain sees that through the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. See, that's where it's a junction in the brain where thoughts, feelings, and actions all converge. It picks up on all the senses, all of the sensory motor signals run through it. The limbic system runs through it, and the executive forebrain runs through it. So it connects all of those parts of the brain. And it's thought of as the place where willpower resides in the brain. Andrew Huberman goes as far as to say that that may be where the will to live exists in the brain. And the brain can't tell the difference between this action of letting go, and it accepts it. It's as good as gone. Now, I'll tell you that it doesn't always work on one throw for me. And I think that comes down to presence. I was at the beach a week prior to that on a random night performing the ritual, and I threw one stone. I was like, oh, that didn't work. I had another stone in my pocket, and I was like, limiting beliefs. And I was just ready to get rid of my limiting beliefs. Threw it again, threw another one. And then about 15 minutes later, I was like, I need one more. And we had some seashells lined up as part of the gong ceremony I was at. And I picked up a seashell, and I was like, limiting beliefs, let's go. And I threw it again. And then I felt this powerful release. And so the best story of when I did this was on January 12th. I was on a date, and I happened to have a couple of stones with me, Apache tears and amethyst. And I asked this guy, I said, hey, normally on the full moon, I like to perform a ritual. Would you like to perform a ritual with me? We were at a restaurant on the edge of the city. There was a forest nearby. And so we walked down. It was snowy. We were careful not to slip and fall. And we walked out to perform the ritual under the full moon. And I don't generally tell people what I'm doing in the moment. Sometimes I'll reflect later. But I had the Apache tears. And I let go of attachments, and I threw that into the woods. And I had an amethyst with me. And I have an 800-pound amethyst in my gong studio behind my house, and it looks like a flame. And I held that in my hand, and I said inside my head, I was like, I'm going all in this time. On the violet flame, I call in pure love. And I looked at the guy next to me, sweet guy, still friends, and I was like, oh, I just fucked that up, because that was not pure love. And I just knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh, okay. And then the next night was the actual full moon. And I did it again. I had a rose quartz that night and another Apache tears. I threw out something else I don't remember. And I looked at the rose quartz and I said, okay, I'm doubling down. I call in pure love. And I got home after that ritual, and the love of my life that I had not talked to in 27 years started messaging me on Facebook. I had a whole string of messages. He had reached out 2 weeks prior. We'd had a very brief exchange, and I didn't think it was going to be anything. And I wasn't thinking about him when I called him pure love. But then when I was like, pure love twice, and there he is. And now 5 months later, we're working on moving in together. So that's the one time I felt like I really, really affected the nature of my reality with one of these rituals. I usually experience a profound release, and then what I'm bringing in is slow to realize, but that one kind of like smacked me in the face.
Amazing. Would you like to hear your story?
Sure. I would love to hear my story.
Some of the greatest teachers in your life come from some of the most unexpected places. I had built my life as a top performer, top thinker, running some of the largest and most intense events in the world. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming through and having experiences. And I had grown accustomed to working 2 days in a single day and always pushing forward in my output, always moving to the next place, always thinking about the next thing, and never taking a moment to stop. And one of my greatest teachers started out as what I thought was one of my greatest curses, being in the times of COVID, when the events that I once built my whole identity and my life around shut down, and I was exposed to mold, which in its own intelligence started shutting down parts of my brain and parts of myself that I was most proud of and most attached to. My ability to think, my ability to perform, my ability to act. And what I didn't realize at the time were these were the things that were keeping me from myself. And I would set out on a journey to learn how to heal myself from what would become almost an inability to think clearly, to act clearly. Everything that I had valued had been entirely stopped. And what I thought were the high-tech, most advanced solutions in biohacking, from hyperbaric oxygen, light therapy, all of the fanciest solutions didn't do anything for me. And I got my first hint through sound that maybe the solution wasn't in doing more, but in doing less and becoming present. Sitting in front of a gong for the first time and feeling the vibrations moving through me. And I started to feel a transformation for the first time in my body. I started to realize that there was something here, not in going harder, not in grinding harder, not in achieving more and doing more, the things that our society and the world around us seems to value. The only thing that we think is really part of us is what we're doing and not who we're being, all came into question. And I set out on a journey to learn about this process, not to do more, but to be present, and to use that as a way to reconnect with myself and not just heal my body, but heal my mind and even heal my spirit. Now, this would take years and a lot of costly and painful mistakes, but I started to learn how to connect actions, symbolism, thoughts, and intentions in a way that would create results that were undeniable in my life. I can remember somewhat embarrassingly being out on a date and inviting him to one of the rituals that I was practicing, holding intention in a stone and throwing it out and speaking what I wanted. I remember saying, I call in pure love, and immediately knew that this man wasn't the love of my life. I felt a little embarrassed and strange that I had just let slip something that I was looking for. But I stuck to this process. And the next night on the full moon, I did it again. I called in true love. Somewhat unexpectedly, the next morning, one of my old lovers and partners from many years ago, who I had not contacted in over a decade, sent me a message. And I realized that there was something happening here. I started to share this message with other people and walk people through these same rituals and processes. And more, I started to see that this wasn't just something for me, but it could help so many other people. When a woman came up to me who had gone through her own series of challenges and trials and tribulations, and after throwing a stone into a water with the right intention, with the right presence, the deceptive simplicity of combining all of those things and activating your mind, your body, and your spirit in a way that society simply does not provide or endorse anymore. And she told me that this was one of the most impactful moments of her life. And I realized in that moment that this could help so many more people and organizations and countries and humanity as a whole. And that's why I started writing Grounded Rituals.
I teared up.
It happens.
Wow. One, it's so impactful to have been listened to with such pure intent, is to simply reflect back the goodness of what I can share. That exercise, your gift, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to witness and be witnessed through this process. And I'm very excited to see the impact that what you're creating and continuing to create truly makes. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, and where can we go to learn more about you and maybe get on the wait list for this book as it comes out?
Well, I have some rituals packaged for sale on groundedritual.com, but I will be changing that website rather than selling products to be instructing people on how to create their own rituals. And that's where that's where the book will be promoted to.
Perfect. And a closing thought to wrap this up for us today.
I will just say that the hardest thing sometimes is to believe in ourselves. And that's this ritual you perform with people through this podcast is a gateway that helps people believe in themselves. It's the same reason why I do the rituals, is to create a situation in the brain on my own where I can have more faith in myself. And so I hope people get that from both of us through this exchange.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for joining us on the Story Engine podcast today.
Thank you.